Okay, morning everyone. So this year I've begun to break all of my previous rules around giving presentations in terms of relying on a live internet connection to get some audience participation going. So I'm going to ask you some questions during the course of the presentation through this interactive polling system. You can give your answers. I'm afraid it's limited to 100 answers, but we should get a really good representation of the room. So that internet address you'll see pop up on the slides as we go through if you don't get a chance to plug that in now or download the app. I'm Kevin Miles, I'm Head of Quality Enhancement and Learning Analytics at the Open University, and we started our journey on kind of getting the most out of analytics or learning analytics about 5 years ago. And I've been kind of leading and coordinating that work across the institution during that period. And the aim of the presentation this morning is to kind of give you an overview of what we've done and some of the outputs that we've produced, but also give you some lessons learned from that journey for any of you who might be, as an institution, about to embark on implementing learning analytics, or you might be partway through an implementation, or you might have just heard about this term, learning analytics. What is it? JISC have developed a service. What's that? What could we get out of learning analytics as an institution? So, first of all, what is learning analytics? And I've put a definition used by the kind of international research community at the top of this slide. The measurement and collection and analysis of data about students and their environments to optimize that kind of learning environment. From a couple of one study in Australia and then a book authored and released by Neil Slater here in the UK, there's also a sense of what are the trajectories then, what are the applications of learning analytics? And in Australia they identified these two kind of trajectories. The most common trajectory when you use the term learning analytics in my experience is leaping to at-risk indicators, kind of predictive analytics, early alert systems. And there are some of those now on the marketplace, and including one built into the JISC service. But the second trajectory they identified was about this kind of developing an understanding of and improving the learning and teaching process for students. And then Neil expanded out to say actually there's ultimately at the end, there's adaptive learning, course recommendations, as well as that improvement of curriculum design and the early alert indicators of success. So, to give us an idea of where we might be at in the room in terms of learning analytics, first little interaction, let's hope this works. Yes, okay, we're starting to get some answers coming through. Whereabouts are your institutions? Okay, so while they come through, I'll just ask a question in the room as well, which is useful to know. Just out of interest, who in the room has either worked at or working at or studied with the Open University? So quite a few in the room who will kind of know the Open University model, distance learning, quite large modules in terms of credit size, studied over pretty much a kind of academic year, October to July. We've still got the answers coming in. Excellent. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I'd really like to know who's fully learning analytics enabled, and whether they're actually institutions or they might be vendors in the room, or whether that's my Open University colleagues going to big us up. Because actually I would say we're in the second one up, kind of still on a roadmap to full implementation after 5 years. Great, so that's the kind of typical responses kind of that I get when I give this presentation. So we've got a range from, yeah, we're aware of it, we've not started. Actually, more institutions getting to the stage now of having some institutional level kind of pilot implementations and in between. So I'm just going to start with talking about a strategic approach to learning analytics and how we look at it from the Open University's perspective. it was really important for us that our kind of learning analytics implementation or development was really tied into our university strategy. And being a distance institution, and our students, we have most of our touch points with our students now are digital, and that's even our associate lecturers who work with a group of 20 to 30 students will commonly have more digital touch points with their students now than face-to-face or telephone contact. So learning analytics is really the way in which we can start to get a sense of how our students are doing and that interaction with the learning materials and the learning activities. And one of our key strategic priorities over the last 5 years has been to support more students to qualify. As a distance institution, as an open entry institution, we do have an issue with student retention. It's very easy for students to drift away from their studies, and so supporting more students to finish off that qualification journey has been a real priority for us. And our learning analytics implementation has really focused around that particular part of our strategy. How we did it, so I'm head of quality enhancement and learning analytics, and there's my team sat in the centre of the world. Yeah. It's just really, this slide is a representation of actually, whilst I kind of sit coordinating this activity across the institution, we have to interact with many, many other units, groups, experts within the university, from the professional services side, IT, student registration, marketing, student support services, through to the academic side as well, colleagues in our faculties. And the gold stars represent where there's kind of key pockets of expertise within our planning office, with our Institute of Educational Technology, so real academic expertise in learning analytics that we could tap into. Now that looks really quite ordered and simple. It actually feels like this. So it's that kind of, as we know working in HE, quite complex organisations, sometimes you need to kind of find the right connections. And in reflecting on this recently, I've thought actually the previous slide might make you think like our group is King's Cross, sat right in the middle, kind of a real kind of focus point. Actually, we're more like Stratford International. It is a kind of hub of coordination, but we're kind of just on the side. And actually, we have quite good connections outside of the university, but it's more difficult sometimes to make the connections within our own institution around learning analytics. So, on to my kind of first two top tips from lessons learned from the last 5 years. Key is executive sponsorship, and at the start of our journey we had a Pro-Vice-Chancellor who was our key sponsor and could create that coalition across the university. A big learning point for us has been, of course, senior leaders in universities come and go, senior leadership changes, and so it's really important to re-energise or make sure you continue to have that executive sponsorship as senior management come and go, and even senior management structures and responsibilities change over time. And the second is to be really clear on that purpose for the use of learning analytics. So we were able to tie that really clearly to a core strategic objective at the Open University. Other institutions, you might be thinking, oh, what is learning analytics? Shouldn't we be doing something? Other people are doing something. A key starting point is why. Why do we want to harness learning analytics in our institution? Our starting point was to develop a strategic framework whereby we could really analyse where are our key priority areas for development. And we built on an article that I found in Harvard Business Review, which talked about these 3 core organisational capabilities for the use of analytics: availability of data, creation of insight, and crucially the third one, which is being able to deploy that insight in processes that will impact the customer in a business sense, students in our sense. And we built that up around some key kind of second line capabilities, particularly focusing on that purple area in this diagram. So which processes could we actually, in the university, deploy learning analytics into to enhance the student experience? And we had some activities in all kind of segments of that circle. And I'll take you through some of those this morning. So, next bit of interaction, and another kind of starting point for us. I'm just going to flash 3 words now up on the screen, and then I'm going to ask you for what's your immediate reaction to those 3 words. What's the word that comes into your phrase that immediately comes to mind? This is always a tester. It's interesting the responses you get to this from different groups. So the first phrase that went up is still buried in that word cloud, GDPR, terror, like that. Cambridge Analytics, is that in there? So a kind of, crikey, things could go wrong here if we don't do this properly. Privacy. So a really kind of interesting mix of the kind of first kind of phrases or words that come to mind when thinking about big data analytics. And when we started to talk about learning analytics at the OU, some of the kind of first responses from, I have to say, kind of mainly our academic community, more so than our student community, was, should we be doing this? You know, is this ethical? What, you know, some kind of privacy concerns coming through. And so one of the first things that we embarked on was looking at the ethical considerations and developing a policy for the ethical use of learning analytics. The text on this is quite small. The slides, I'm sure, will be made available. There's a link to actually our ethics policy on that slide, and it's openly available. So we built out an ethics policy around some key principles that were really kind of student-based, and we involved our students in the creation of that policy. So we had student representatives on the working group. We ran student consultation before finalising that policy, and then we've produced information for our students around how we're using data and learning analytics to support them through their study journey. So the policy is available to them. We've got articles on our kind of student help centre that specifically reference learning analytics, including the kind of use of predictive analytics as well in that context. To date, I'm not sure, there we go. We've not had any kind of major complaints or concerns come forward from our student body around what we're doing. We're quite transparent around the data that we're using and the purposes, obviously, that we're putting those data to. So, second 2 kind of top tips. In terms of kind of program formulation, there's a lot potentially that can be done, but the classic kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time is a key learning point that I've taken from the last kind of 5 years in this area. We potentially set out to try and do too much to begin with, so actually looking for those kind of quick wins and smaller focused chunks of things to achieve. And then foregrounding those should we arguments is definitely something we got right at the start, and involving our students in that process was a real benefit. for us. So on to predictive analytics, which is somewhere that kind of everyone kind of jumps to initially when thinking about learning analytics. So we've developed kind of two approaches and two or three applications of kind of predictive analytics at the Open University. So we've used more conventional statistical modelling techniques that enable us to give us a much greater understanding of kind of student success factors, and we use some of those techniques within benchmarking within our quality assurance processes internally. And then we've produced retention probabilities, so predictions of student retention that we're able to feed to our student support teams and our associate lecturers to be able to trigger interventions with students that might be showing as at risk of dropping out of their studies. And then using more advanced machine learning techniques, we've got a bit more granular with predictions around assignment submissions. So over those large modules studied over 9 months, students have several assignments to submit where they'll get feedback from their tutor. And it's really those assignments that kind of drive the learning and drive the engagement of the students. So predicting whether those students are going to submit those assignments or not gives our associate lecturers a real tangible hook to potentially make a contact with a student that might be looking like they're struggling. And then something we're starting to test, not only test, is a kind of student-facing recommender off the back of some of those predictions. This is a kind of vision of the cycle of student data being turned into predictive at-risk indicators and then potentially starting to show some of those data to students in the future. But at the moment, we pipe those data really via our support teams and associate lecturers to kind of make a human decision as to whether they're going to intervene with those individual students. And over the last few years, we've been kind of rolling out and increasing our deployment across the institution and running several pilot studies to look at the impact of these intervention strategies based on predictive analytics. One example of those studies is a trial we ran with our colleagues in the OU in Scotland. And this looked at identifying a cohort of students in a particular probability band of completing their module. And we ran a random control trial whereby the control group received all the normal support and intervention and that all students get starting their module. And the intervention group, we ran an additional intervention with to see whether that would make a difference for this particular kind of group of students that fell within this probability band. And that consisted of an initial text, phone call, and then an email if we couldn't make contact with the student. And these are the kind of outcomes we got. So there was a statistically significant uplift, not just at the beginning of the module, which is where the intervention happened, but that persisted through to the students completing the module and then returning to study in the following academic year. And we've run a number of these studies, not all of which show this sort of outcome, and that's part of the process really of kind of testing the intervention strategies and learning from them in terms of how best to optimize the use of these predictive analytics. And the second I mentioned, we used kind of machine learning techniques to develop predictions of assignment submission, and that's presented through our OU Analyze dashboard where we show kind of aggregate data about VLE engagement of the groups of students and the individual students, and then we get the assignment submission predictions. And this really gives our associate lecturers another piece of information to add to the contact they have with the students to decide whether they might intervene. And we've experienced kind of some resistance to that over a period of time, but deployment has gradually increased as more individuals have come across the system, see the benefits of using the system, and that kind of spreads organically then through the organisation with some help from our central team. the important thing to note here is that this is not happening in isolation from other things going on in the university. So whilst now, this year, we've kind of, our deployment is really ramping up across the number of modules, schools, students that could potentially benefit from this system. In 16-17, we were kind of affected by something else that went on in the institution. Okay, so we had an issue with an operational system that was being changed around tutorial bookings, and that kind of made everyone kind of retract back from any other change activities that were going on. So, that was an important kind of lesson learned for us in terms of the rest of the context in the university and the change environment, and how then people could engage with our kind of little piece of change around learning analytics. Key to that rollout has been the support model that we've put in place, and we've recruited some kind of early adopter associate lecturers as super users that then run support and training for other staff on other modules that are now receiving those predictions. And that's been incredibly powerful because we've got practitioners talking to practitioners about how they use the data, how they support their students, how they intervene based on these predictions. And some of the evaluation outcomes that we've had around the OU Analyze deployment has also been extremely positive around finding that the kind of relative use of that system by the associate lecturers is correlated with better retention of their students, and some of the kind of qualitative kind of comments that we've got from our associate lecturers around the efficacy of that system and how it helps them do their job. And the second comment here in the orange is, for us, has been quite powerful, because actually this was someone who was quite skeptical about using these predictions and indicators, that from having engaged with some of the training sessions and support materials has now become a real kind of advocate of the system for us within their particular curriculum area. And another kind of moving away from the predictive analytics side of things now, and more to the how can we illuminate real kind of factors in the learning design of our modules that drive student retention and student satisfaction. This kind of curriculum enhancement application of learning analytics. I'll show you some examples of work we've done in this space. So some of the earliest work we've done looked at the factors associated with student satisfaction. And we have as I'm sure everyone else does, a kind of end of module evaluation survey. They used to run kind of 40 questions. And we ran a factor analysis around that to look at what are the key factors actually that we're asking students about in that context. And then which of these actually affect overall satisfaction to a greater and lesser extent. And these are the kind of factors, and actually it found that the kind of module content and in effect the learning design of the module is driving overall satisfaction slightly more than these other factors. So that has enabled us to turn that into real guidance for our module teams to focus on the content and how learning activities are structured in their module if they're getting kind of lower satisfaction scores on their module. We also looked at kind of key drivers, and actually is it the teaching materials and assessment that's driving overall satisfaction, or could there be other factors at play, like just the size of the module, the level of study, so are students more or less satisfied at level 1, level 2 or level 3, and that showed us that it was these kind of module content and learning design factors that were at play. More recently, we've looked at, that's not the slide I was expecting, apologies. We've also looked at whether learning design can be correlated to those overall student satisfaction and student retention outcomes. And at the OU, we've codified our learning designs through our production process, and a study led by Professor Bart Rientes first of all looked at whether those learning designs cluster into particular types, and he found 4 broad types of learning designs and modules, from what he labelled constructivist, so heavily on just reading and watching things, to socio-constructivist, which built in a lot more collaborative learning activities where students needed to interact with peers and maybe take part in group work. And they found that that kind of high degree of reading and watching kind of correlated negatively with VLE engagement. So actually, because the students weren't prompted to go back to the VLE to undertake activities, they didn't. Whereas with a lot of peer-to-peer group work, that positively correlated with the VLE engagement. But they did find that, you know, students just getting lots of reading and watching, we got higher satisfaction scores from those modules. But the high degree of communication and collaboration activities built in correlated highly with student retention. But that correlated negatively with student satisfaction. So that really prompted us to think about, well, why is that happening? You know, is that the stereotypical students don't like group work, don't like working together? Potentially, particularly students that might be studying at the OU at a distance made that choice to kind of study at a distance. Or could it be about how we're actually engaging the students and explaining those activities and introducing those activities to the students? A key other finding from this study was that at a module level, there was no relationship between student satisfaction and student retention. So we had modules with really high retention and low satisfaction, and vice versa. So next 2 kind of top tips is look for those super users as you're kind of rolling out learning analytics, and grow organically. So this has certainly worked for us at the Open University. We've grown organically. We haven't gone, right, we'll produce a system, we'll create this, and then we'll roll it out to everyone all at the same time. Huge change program. And then when you do get those outcomes, whether they're evaluation outcomes or kind of insight outcomes, create those compelling case studies and stories so that you can communicate those key outcomes to your user base. Okay. So, next little question for you. Give yourself a rating on a scale of 1 to 6, where 1 is really easy, 6 is nearly impossible. How easy it is, crucially for your users, to access data for analysis. Well, this is really interesting. So I typically give this presentation to kind of mixed audiences, and often, because learning analytics is led from very different parts of different organisations. So in some organisations, it's the CIO, IT director that's kind of leading learning analytics. In others, it might be coming from the kind of planning office, because that's where the data analysts sit. Others, it is from a learning and teaching or student support function. And whenever I've done this before, there's been more of a locus in the 3, 4, or even 2 area. And I was expecting possibly for that to happen here with this audience, but perhaps you're just more honest. So I would say certainly from talking to colleagues in the UK around kind of learning analytics, that is quite typical. The real challenge is how can we get access to the data, or it's in separate systems. We have no kind of data warehouse, single source of truth. Right, so we recognise that as well. That is a real problem and continues to be a challenge at the OU. And we set out to look to build a core data warehouse around student analytics data. And then also we procured a data visualization tool. We use SAS in the OU, and so we procured SAS Visual Analytics, or that similar functionality to the likes of Tableau, ClickView, and others. we've got a range of kind of dashboard tools that makes both student satisfaction and retention and progression data available to our kind of module and qualification teams in a visual way. And we've had some really positive feedback around how powerful visualizing this data. Prior to this, they got a lot of this information just via spreadsheets, large spreadsheets with lots of data in. And how powerful this can be for directors of teaching in our schools to really engage module and qualification teams with particular issues that might be happening within their parts of the curriculum. But providing the data is one thing. Users actually being able to kind of understand what's happening and use that and turn that into action is something quite different. So this just asking you to think about whereabouts are you as an institution with the maturity of your kind of data provision for users and the literacy of those users in actually interpreting, understanding what they're seeing. An interesting kind of spread here, and is if I was to put, if I was to take a kind of go at doing this for the OU, I think I'd put us somewhere here as well, so not quite in that top right quadrant. So absolutely key is how our users can use those data outputs that we've built. We've still got answers coming in. Okay, so one of the things that we have done is put a reasonably large amount of scaffolding and support in place for our users. So we started with, well, what's the kind of framework for that? And we developed what we labeled Analytics for Action framework and produced a toolkit, a self-help toolkit on top of that. And there's nothing groundbreaking here, but illuminating the fact that we need the right performance measures and drill downs underneath those KPIs to understand what's going on. And the key thing was trying to bring together a menu of response actions for module leaders in particular to look at, okay, this particular measure or metric seems to be lower for my module. What can I do about it? And actually making some of the actions, expose those actions to them. But then if I'm going to make a change, how can I actually measure the impact of that change? And this was prior to the advent of the Teaching Excellence Framework, and it's becoming increasingly important now in terms of gathering evidence and identifying impact for any improvements that we're making within the curriculum. As I said, we've got self-help material available. We also run, for kind of 50 modules each year, direct one-to-one support where they'll have a two or three data touchpoint meetings during the course of the year with a learning designer who will look at the data with them and identify issues and identify actions they can take to improve the student experience on that module for their students. The final part of my presentation just looks at how we've worked with some of our academic partners through our programme, both from a perspective of illuminating insight around learning design and the student experience, but also in terms of kind of rolling out learning analytics for their particular curriculum areas. So this is an example, again, a project led by Bart Rientes that kind of has tried to visualize learning designs of different modules in different faculties to look at particularly the variance in workload and different types of activities that a student's being asked to do. And what they found through visualizing this, and the different colors on these graphs denote different types of activity. So the blue in particular is assessment, and the kind of orangey color is assimilating information. And then there's productive activities, experiential activities, and communication activities built in there as well. And they found just through visualizing this to the module teams, it had a real impact in terms of the module teams looking at how this could be impacting their students. In particular, these at the bottom here, where you've got huge peaks in some weeks and troughs in other weeks. So we have found that modules with a more even weighting of workload across the module have higher retention rates than those with the kind of big peaks and troughs. We've also looked at sentiment mining our open comments within our module evaluation questionnaires. So this started with an analysis of 51,000 comments across 23 of our kind of large undergraduate modules. And this is really, we have modules with, say, 3,000 students a year. So typically, module teams could be receiving 500 to 1,000 open comments and their module evaluation questionnaire. So we're looking at ways in which we can provide them with a kind of more automated analysis of those open comments, as opposed to them having to plough through physically hundreds of open comments from their students. And this is just an example of how we could look at the sentiment around issues to do with tutorials, where we have got a spread of some modules, some really positive comments, and some modules, some less positive comments around tutorials. And then we've really tried to identify champions within our faculties to help with the kind of rollout of some of the predictive analytics in particular. And this is Chris Kubiak in our health and social care department, who's been in the project with us right from the start, and he's now director of teaching within his school and is really facilitating and championing the rollout of the use of analytics. I think when I talked about kind of stories earlier on, actually hearing from the academics that are using and championing the use of the data can be, again, really powerful within institutions in terms of adoption. So this is Chris's view.
What predictive data does is that it identifies those students who are at risk of not submitting the next assignment. Now, for tutors on our modules, such as K101, this is very, very helpful. Tutors draw on predictive data alongside other things they know about student risk factors, such as their own experience as tutors or their knowledge of the student personally, to identify those who may be in need of additional support. K101, an introduction to health and social care, is our largest module. It has around 3,000 to 4,000 students a year, most of them new to open university studying. We want to make sure that they come in and they receive the support they need to make their way through the module, because we want them to progress on to the degree.
So whilst kind of as a semi kind of professional service, we're at the centre of the university coordinating this activity, actually hearing from the academics and having academic champions within our faculties is really powerful for us in terms of driving adoption. So almost the last couple of tips. Don't underestimate the guidance required and support needed for users using analytics and using what can be fairly straightforward analytic outputs, and then find and nurture those champions and stars within the academic community to help with that deployment. So final interaction. I'm coming back to those 4 broad applications of learning analytics, and I've given you some examples of most of them, not so much the adaptive learning and course recommendation. Where do you think potentially they rank for your institution going forward in terms of engaging with learning analytics? That's interesting. So, things are changing still. Yeah, so other audiences, sometimes the curriculum and learning design and early alert student success indicators can flip around between 1 and 2. But it looks like the early alert indicators within this room seems to be the kind of top implementation. And that really comes back to purpose at the start. So thinking about what the purpose of learning analytics deployment might be for your institution. So this is where we started 5 years ago, and we're kind of 5 years on, and so we're now reflecting on whether this is the right kind of framework for us going forward. And we've started to look at, from what we've learned over the last 5 years, how can we kind of set ourselves up now going forward. And these kind of layers haven't really changed. We've kind of looked to simplify them a little bit. But one of the key learning points for us has been the kind of people issue, and actually what people capabilities and skills and kind of processes do we need to have around these organisational capabilities. And certainly we need to look at the data science analysis and crucially visualisation and storytelling capabilities within the area of creating insight, and crucially the data literacy and culture within the end user base is absolutely crucial to success. And then there's obviously an increasing prevalence now around data governance and compliance within the kind of data availability and storage and usage. And we kind of wrap all of that around or inside a clear ethical framework within which we're working. And these are now some of the issues that we're thinking about and actively working on at the OU. So we're looking at moving towards a cloud-based analytics platform and refreshing our architecture and tool sets that we're using, and moving more into looking at text mining and sentiment analysis, and then looking to try and employ more around CRM analytics, testing and learning approaches to new teaching methods at the OU, and then how we can align with those QA processes and teaching excellence framework going forward. So my final point is this doesn't stand still, and it's really important to kind of integrate, but then review and then repeat in a cycle. So this has been a representation of a lot of work which a lot of people at the Open University have been involved in. So I'm just the kind of spokesperson for this huge group of talent represented on this slide. And there have been references kind of scattered through the presentation that the slides are made available. And here are some of the kind of published outputs of our work. Thank you very much. Have we got some time for a question or two? No, stunned silence.
No? Okay, well, thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you very much.